That's where the environmental commissioner would come in to be that kind of advocate for individuals or communities whose rights have been undermined by pollution like that in that example I gave.
There is no pathway forward. The shelter does not disappear. It becomes permanent by default.
We've been seeing it happen all over our province, and so what has to be demonstrated is some leadership, not capitulation. Because capitulation means death for people, and that is unacceptable.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the week's top stories from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. We begin this week in St. Stephen, where you're at a tense council meeting for January. I watched a bit of it on television live, but tell us a little bit about what was discussed. What were the main takeaways?
Yeah, so the council was discussing a transitional housing project. They called it a bridge housing project. It's sort of the same thing, proposed by Neighborhood Works Incorporated, which is the operator of the current shelter on 9 Main Street. They proposed that bridge housing project for 199 Union, which is a municipal property, and people may recognize that address as the address closest to the food bank, but it is also where Public Works has some of their equipment, and also the fire department houses their fire trucks there.
Okay, and tell us a little bit about what was on the agenda.
Okay, so the motion was to reject the project at 199 Union, and I sort of felt like there were two stories that were at play here. The council received, according to Mayor Alan McHagran, about 40 emails, 39 pages apparently of emails of people sort of asking questions, but also raising opposition to it being at that property. And then the council also said that the municipality ended up having concerns about it being in such close proximity to the Public Works and Fire Hall. And so that for that reason, they were deciding to reject the proposal.
Okay. What was the argument around why it would be complicated to have it near a municipally owned building, such as something to do with Public Works? Because it seems to me that could actually be a reason to do it there, because if it has to do with all these emails you're receiving from neighbors who might be concerned about the development near their residence, wouldn't it make sense then for it to be neighboring to a town-owned facility?
Yeah, I think there wasn't much of an argument. That was the reason they gave, and a few people sort of, chose that reason for why they voted, and the vote was unanimous. Everybody around the table voted to reject the outcome. But really, the issue here is that this is the third property that has sort of been not suitable in terms of providing the next step forward in how we see a visible reduction in homelessness. They first rejected Happy Valley Road because of its proximity to the high school and local businesses, but also houses. That was that piece of property next to the highway that was provincially owned. 9 Main Street, again, was a bit tricky. Neighbors say they were invited to the open house only 2 days before. Neighborhood Works says it was a week. And so that's provincially owned property, and it's zoned closely enough, and so they put the shelter there. But since that time, there have been enormous amounts of complaints about alleged drug use, drug deals, neighbors experiencing, witnessing violence between residents of the shelter, ambulances, police cars coming at all days and all times of the night. And so this was the third property that sort of was proposed and then rejected by the community. And it is worth noting that the council did send a notice to the properties within 200 meters of the proposed project site.
Now, I know that when I was listening to parts of the meeting from home, one of the reasons that a councillor gave, I believe, I heard this from Councillor Emily Rodas at one point, is that council would like to see something like detox beds in the community before we get into something like transitional housing. Argument being, if there isn't a place for someone, if they have to be driven 5 hours away by Neighborhood Works to go to detox, Wouldn't that be the obvious next step as opposed to bringing in transitional housing at this time?
Well, so the idea is a housing first model. So housing first means that the first step in the continuum of care is to provide shelter. So a place for people to feel secure, where they can lock the door, where they're comfortable, where they can cook food, where they can go to the bathroom, where they can shower. And so there are a vast number of statistics that show that housing first actually works, because once a person is properly housed and comfortable and secure, they will start to take the steps that they need to become or to return to a productive member of society. And so that's what the transitional housing is for. It's not permanent housing. What it is it's a transition between the shelter, which is precarious and sort of difficult to stay in, and has a bit of temptation around it in terms of that drug use that we just spoke about, and then the transitional housing, and then permanent housing, stable permanent housing. So they're operating under the housing first model. And Jim Stewart, who is the executive director of Neighborhood Works, spoke to the council last night during public comment period, and he said no community wants a shelter. If there's no pathway forward, the shelter does not disappear. It becomes permanent by nature.
And when we look at something like a shelter, I think it's important to keep in mind things like even having a permanent address, how important that can be to getting back on your feet. You can't really list a shelter, I would assume, if you're trying to get back on your feet as your address.
Yeah, you can't get a form of identification in New Brunswick without an address. I do believe that the homeless hubs are sort of dealing with that information, and working on how they sort of get through that process. So certainly there is things that are happening. There is money available to St. Stephen, although I haven't quite been able to figure out how much money is available to them.
For transitional housing specifically?
That's right.
Okay.
So the government announced a little more than $7 million to do that work. And St. Stephen, like Miramichi, is sort of one of the areas that has developed a more significant population of people who are unhoused. And so they're at a sense of urgency where they sort of need this money, and they need to take the next step forward in making their community better.
Okay, so then what does that mean for the money allotted for this project if they unanimously voted it down right now? Is it still on the table? Is there a time frame we're working with where it has to be used by? Does it show maybe, for a municipality that declared a state of emergency on homelessness now a number of years ago, what does that mean for how seriously they will be taken by the province next time they try to have it funded?
Sure. McEachern has said to me that he has been assured by the province that money is available to them. And he said in a phone conversation that they're thinking that a new property is days away, not months away.
Okay.
And so, but they're also under the impression or the assumption that Neighborhood Works has found or discovered a property that is zoned properly and suitable for this project. I don't know if that's the case, but he has been assured, and Chief Administrative Officer Jeff Renaud has been named to the Advisory Council to the Ministerial Task Force on Homelessness, so he has a seat sort of at the table off to the side, not at the direct table, but he's advising the Ministerial Task Force on the needs sort of in his community, and so they have been assured that money is there and available to them.
Okay.
How long that lasts, I don't know.
I was going to say we have municipal elections in May, so this could be that it's something that the next council takes on. But again, we are still in this. We're coming upon what will be the coldest day of winter, and still no solution.
Yeah, this is not unique to St. Stephen. This not in my backyard attitude, and in smaller communities, the changes that the community is feeling are very acute and devastating, because they have not dealt with it They live in rural New Brunswick for a reason. They love small towns. They love the intimacy of knowing your neighbor. But what I would say, and what others have pointed out, are these are your neighbors. They're your friends. They're people who went to high school with you or may have at one point worked with you. And I did speak to a housing expert from the University of New Brunswick, Tobin LeBlanc-Haley, who said, at some point the council has to show some grit and make the decision, because not making the decision means people are going to die and have died waiting for someone to make the right decision. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that, she said there is privilege in being able to write the council or speak to the council or come to a council meeting. She said there is a greater responsibility for elected leaders in general to advocate for the needs of people who cannot advocate for themselves, which include people who are unhoused, and that includes the council. So they need to really step up and protect that vulnerable community, because they don't have a voice in this conversation. Nobody is asking them to come to council meetings or town halls or participate in presentations. So that's where we're at the moment. Take a listen to University of New Brunswick professor Tobin LeBlanc-Haley on the housing issue and bridge housing in St. Stephen.
One of the big challenges that we're seeing all over the province is the need for initiatives like the bridge housing or transition housing, like an expanded shelter system, like different kinds of supportive housing, what have you. And so we know that the need is there, but we are seeing pretty consistent resistance from communities to these kinds of developments. And unfortunately, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, the pressure from community has been successful in either delaying, shutting down, or moving a particular project. And it is really unfortunate.
We also spoke about education around homelessness and addiction recovery.
I think good faith consultation can have a role to play in addressing changing neighborhood dynamics. I think it really depends on how community members who are not houseless, who don't need access to these services, come into that space. I think one thing that municipal governments or any level of government can do in these consultations is to provide an open space for dialogue and for people to ask questions and for information to be provided. There is always a risk, however, that it provides a site of organizing against critical infrastructure in a community. And, Carolyn Witzman says, people have a right to housing, you don't have a right to choose your neighbor. This is Carolyn Witzman, a very famous housing scholar. And, I think that really is the message that should carry the day. People are dying. People don't have a place to live. It is freezing right now. This is critical life-saving infrastructure that will only strengthen our communities. And so it is always really disheartening to see when, in this case, a local government can't get it done. And it really is a sin. I know people are struggling with the changing dynamics, in New Brunswick, but homelessness or the need for any kind of housing support is not a personal failure, it's a structural issue. And these kinds of proposed developments, whether it be a shelter, whether it be transitional housing, whether it be permanent supportive housing, these are responding to the issue of homelessness and housing precarity for what it is, which is a structural problem, not a personal failing. And so, yes, it is a change in a neighborhood potentially, but it is a critical and life-saving change.
She said the government has to move forward at some point, but how do they do that?
Yes, education about what a particular site entails or how it's an evidence-based intervention that will improve life in a particular municipality, St. Stephen, like wherever we are. Absolutely is a critical part of any change to a neighborhood. A justification for why a particular piece of infrastructure or a particular new service is going in can be an important part of getting community buy-in. And that can be anything from, like a transitional housing or like a shelter, but that also could be like a new community center or, what have you. Anytime there's a change to a neighborhood, yes, there needs to be education about like what this is, how big is it going to be, who's it going to serve, and what's its purpose, for sure. I'm not sure that top-down education of people who are resistant to uh, supports being located in their community for people who are experiencing homelessness or housing precarity is necessarily the right approach. As much as I love it, I'm an educator, but I'm not sure that that will necessarily work. I don't think that it's worked in the past. I think open consultation, sure, maybe, but I also think that decision makers just have to do it. You just have to do it. These are elected officials. Their job is to protect the public. We know that when people are living without housing or without appropriate housing or safe housing, that is a threat to their well-being. It is a threat to their life, to their longevity, to their health, to their mental health. And so the job of elected officials is to make those hard decisions, to sometimes take it on the chin from a community who may not like a decision that is being made. But I find that the anticipation of living in proximity to, let's say, like a homelessness shelter or a transitional housing shelter or a maybe longer term transitional housing, building, the anticipation or like what is imagined is going to happen is far worse than actually just like living with people day in, day out. And so I think the best thing that we can do is elect officials and pressure our officials to do what's right, do what's evidence-based. And like, yeah, you might have to take it on the chin, but we know that people are dying. And so this is the situation that we find ourselves in. Homelessness is a policy failure. It's not a personal failure. And so there needs to be a policy correction. And those policies are a critical part of that policy correction is like transitional housing, shelters, more supportive housing, more public housing. It's not fighting about how to best mobilize exclusionary zoning or whatever have you. That's not going to save lives. It's not going to deal with the issues. And truthfully, what people are seeing and what they're concerned about is visible. I mean, usually, right? It's sort of like the visible realities of like houselessness or the visible realities like precarious housing. But once people are provided with a place to live, that actually goes away. And then you just have neighbors, right? So your neighbors go from being unhoused folks about which many people have all these kinds of like misconceptions to housed folks. And your neighbors are housed. Yeah.
LeBlanc Haley also addressed these comments from Neighborhood Works Executive Director Jim Stewart.
So I want to begin saying this clearly and sincerely. No community wants a shelter. We build shelters because people are sleeping outside in unsafe places in cold. Shelters exist because something has already gone wrong. And everyone in this room has said the same thing. We want to eliminate the need for the shelter altogether. And if there is no pathway forward, the shelter does not disappear. It becomes permanent by default. Housing First teaches us something simple but powerful. People need housing and supports follow. Bridge housing is how we reduce dependence on shelters. It's how shelters return to what they were meant to be, temporary, rarely used, and eventually unnecessary. The at-home study, the largest Housing First project ever conducted, followed over 2,000 people in 5 cities, including Moncton. Participants were randomly assigned to Housing First or traditional services. The results were striking. 73% of Housing First participants were stably housed after 1 year. Only 31% of those Housing First achieved the same objective. Ending homelessness does not happen by wishing it away. It doesn't happen by closing doors. It happens by building a pathway out, step by step, person by person. If our shared goal is truly to eliminate the need for shelters and to end homelessness in the municipal district of St. Stephen, then bridge housing cannot be viewed as optional. It's essential. Neighborhood Works welcomes feedback and dialogue because lasting solutions require partnerships. Regardless of the decision tonight, we want to work together with council, community members, and stakeholders to be part of the solution that is both compassionate and effective. There is a clear and achievable path forward. What is required is a collective will to move ahead, and I assure you that NWI will be there.
New Brunswick, no question, we are facing an absolute, I mean, the word crisis has lost all meaning, but like an absolute moment of unprecedented, visible, chronic, absolute homelessness in our province. We are seeing that right now. I'm not saying that this is the highest it's ever been, but it's certainly the highest ever been in my lifetime. And that's challenging for sure. But the other thing is that we have an opportunity here because of scale to actually respond. Like I lived in Toronto and I worked in Toronto and I worked in housing in Toronto, and we thousands of people, right? In my city who were experiencing homelessness. Here, we know who they are. We know who they are for the most part, not always, but generally. And there is an ability to respond and see real, measurable improvement quite quickly. You know, and this is a crisis that is occurring all across the country, but in our smaller communities, there is an opportunity to respond quickly and really effectively. And a bridging housing program or a transitional housing program can play a role in that. We also need more public housing units, right? Like transitioning to where is always my question when we talk about transitional housing. But certainly there is an opportunity here to intervene quickly. And it sounds like a transitional housing program was identified as a possible intervention. It shouldn't be blocked. We can do something. And, you know, as someone who grew up in New Brunswick, and I left for a long time and I came back, and as a housing scholar, I came back into this environment where like we were talking about housing all the time. One of the things that I find the most disheartening is that when I was away, I was like, yeah, I grew up in a small province. Everybody knows each other. It's not perfect. We got a lot of problems. There's racism. There's homophobia. There's a lot of poverty, right? We have a lot of problems in our province. But by and large, neighbors look out for each other and keep an eye on each other. And it's when I see things like that, I'm like, well, I can't say that anymore. Right? So where is that, you know, that small town commitment to like supporting one another, to we're all in it together? I am not seeing that in response to this crisis, and that's really disheartening.
As well, after the meeting, we asked several members of the community who were in attendance for the vote if they wanted to speak on the issue of the transitional housing proposed project. We spoke with Ward 3 resident Chandra Best.
Well, what I make of the conversation is that the reason that they voted not to go with 199 Union is not because they disagree with putting housing up there. Transitional housing is the new term they've introduced today instead of bridge housing. So that they're supportive of the transitional housing, just they can't use that location for operational reasons. So yeah, that's the reason that they voted against that location.
Do you think the community is sort of struggling because to come to support transitional housing because of the experience they're having right now with the shelter?
I absolutely do. I think that people are tired, they're scared, they're worried, and this has been going on for a long time, at least three and a half, 4 years, where there's been constant, you know, police and ambulance all the time, what people see out there, actual behavior, drug paraphernalia on the ground. It's been going on for too long. People are exhausted, and people can can't even sell their homes anymore because the value of their property is decreasing because of the stigma associated with what's going on around here. It's a very, very sad situation for everyone concerned, not just the addicts and not just people who are homeless, but the people who are living in this community and have to see it and experience on a pretty regular basis. Businesses downtown, the daycare across the street from the lodge. It's having a big impact, and people are exhausted and they're just, I think, fed up.
They made another resolution, which is that they're not going to stop trying to get transitional housing. How do we find the middle in this situation?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure that we're talking and to accept what each, I don't want to say side, but that's the first term that comes to my mind, because we kind of are on, there's a lot of opposing ideas about how this needs to be dealt with. And so we need to have conversations, but we need to have conversations with people in the room. We talk about partners. Well, don't forget that all of the community members who pay taxes, who've invested their life into their community, into their home, that we are a huge partner. So don't forget about us. Make sure that you keep us in the loop every step of the way, and don't make sure that we have all the information that we can to understand not just what's going on today but what is the plan. You can't have phase 1 of a plan if you don't have phase 2 and phase 3. So bring us along so that we can understand what's going on and what we can anticipate, because we can't be hopeful if there isn't any hope in the message. We can only be anxious and fearful and angry. So we need more information, and we don't need fancy slogans. We need meaningful information that we can really understand and hook our teeth into. I think that's it, yeah.
Do you think that the province has shown enough commitment, not just to helping St. Stephen, but all of the communities that are sort of grappling with the same issue?
No, I don't. I think that what the province is continuing to do is just give us Band-Aid solutions. There needs to be something that's long-term. There needs to be something that has a much more magnitude of what they're willing to do and what they're willing to invest. We need to hear more from them. We need more of a commitment.
Do you think that Band-Aid solution maybe, is tying the council's hands, sort of? They're asking for all the things that they need, but they're not getting them.
I agree with that 100%. I think council can only do so much. We need to look to the provincial government and actually the federal government as well. Things need to change at every level, and I feel like a municipal government is just struggling along at sort of the bottom of the food chain, so to speak, not to be derogatory in any way. But how can you operate when you have a provincial government and a federal government that we're actually opposed to as well?
That was Municipal District of St. Stephen Ward 3 resident Chandra Bess, Executive Director of Neighborhood Works Jim Stewart, and University of New Brunswick Professor Tobin LeBlanc Haley.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk all things politics and water quality in Blacks Harbour with Green Party leader David Kuhn.
We're talking about drinking water, breathing air. These are things that are essential for our health and well-being. And with the lack of a right to those things, what we've seen is, illness and impacts on communities that have not been positive.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. So we had Green Party leader David Kuhn in the studio this week. What did he want to talk about?
Well, we talked about a lot of things. I think a lot of people in Charlotte County know that this part of the world is close to his heart. He spends a lot of time in Warwick. Truthfully, I used the beginning of the interview just to talk about world politics and get his perspective on everything from Prime Minister Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum, what it means for Canada going forward, what it means for New Brunswick in particular going forward, just because I think it's one of these moments in world history where I really do want to hear what everyone's thinking, especially all of our elected officials, to hear where they stand, maybe to shed some light on their perspective. Everyone comes with a different perspective, a different party platform, but how that applies to these unprecedented times is really interesting. So we started off just talking about the world stage and what this moment of time means. But one of the things, I mean, I think with the Green Party, I said to him, you know, I think the Green Party in particular has always been up for the idea of doing very inconvenient things to have a systemic reboot. You need to restructure for a lot of green policy, right? It's a new way of doing things, a brighter way forward for the planet. That's most of the way we think about the Green Party. And what I'm going to talk about later in this portion of the show has more to do with that. But because of that, I think it makes their perspective really interesting now. There's a lot that we might have to reboot, whether it's our trade partners, things like that. It's a moment in time where I think Canada's going to have to be up for a lot of inconvenient, uncomfortable changes to navigate the next chapter of our country. So getting his perspective just on that was really interesting. So I recommend to anyone at home to check out the full interview, whether you watch our newly branded show, Town and Province. The first episode of Town and Province was with the Premier, end of year. We had John Williamson on last week, our MP, Conservative MP. So this new show has all kinds of leaders, provincial, federal, and then we will also have mayors on this show as well. So we're really excited about it, sort of taking the place of Your Town Matters and a lot of shows that we used to put on Southwest Magazine. Whenever MP Williamson came in, he comes in every 2 months to give us an update from Ottawa. We were putting him on Southwest Magazine, so now we're putting everyone together in Town and Province. But one of the things we spoke about in depth was that the Green Party of New Brunswick is championing new legislation. It's Bill 19, an act respecting the rights to a healthy environment. And so basically what they want to see is that it be your right to live in a healthy environment, no matter where you are in the province. And so they're looking to also have an environmental rights commissioner to take on those duties of listening to the public and finding out where things don't seem fair and justified.
The Green Party had a real resurgence a few years ago. David Kuhn is extremely popular, and he was extremely popular when he was first elected, and he continues to be extremely popular in his riding, even though his riding has now fundamentally changed with the redrawing of the boundaries, the electoral boundaries. But they did have a resurgence, right? You saw Kevin Arsenault step in, Megan Mitten from Tantramar, and while Kevin is gone now, Megan and David sit in the House as they have official party status as the third party in the Legislative Assembly. And what is noticeable about the two of them is that they sort of don't, like, they're not part of the Conservatives, they're not part of the Liberals. They can, as you mentioned, really advocate for the things that are important to the Green Party, but also to their constituents. Megan Mitten recently filed a right to information request to the Department of Transportation for county roads money, and she found out that to some degree, ministers were getting more money than non-ministers or opposition members. So they really do have that capacity, and Bill 19 is going to be one of those things.
I think it's one of those things that for people at home, I read your comments online. I posted our interview with Green Party leader David Kuhn on my Facebook page yesterday, and I always find the comments interesting. Someone said, great interview. Someone else said, oh, why does it matter? And that was the argument. And so, this is the argument that you're saying right there. They offer a different perspective. Whether you voted for them or not, what they're able to do in the legislature is hold both the party, the Liberals, and the opposition, the Conservatives, in account, and that makes it really interesting. Something like a environmental rights commissioner wouldn't be something I really would expect to see from either party too at this time, but it's interesting that the Greens put it forward. And then, like you said, with Megan Minton, looking at both governments and saying what's going on, it gives them a role that I think, when we're used to just the two, the opposition being the one that critiques, having that third party in there can make it really interesting.
Yes, and I will say it is easy to criticize when you've never been the governing party. I think there are limitations to, what happens when you become the governing party of New Brunswick. And so it is a bit easier to criticize and introduce things that you feel are important to your constituents or to your party. And it is, again, easier to criticize when you haven't been sitting in those seats or governing New Brunswickers or having to make tough decisions about whether this money gets given to this department or that social assistance program. I don't know whether he would, be a good governing party. There's not enough of them to do that. But certainly it is an important, critical third eye, so to speak, that is watching the government and can objectively sort of look at them and say, listen, this doesn't seem right. And you didn't do anything about it either when you were in government. So it's kind of like, it's an objective third eye.
And I said to David Kuhn while he was here, I was like, he's been in government my whole time at CHCO, so I've really gotten to know him over the years. Asked him about his popularity too with the younger voters as well. He's quite popular in the university areas. And one thing we were talking about and why it ties back to the environmental rights commissioner that they're hoping to see put in place is that Tory Hawkins of Blacks Harbour wrote to David Kuhn, the Green Party leader, because he's the leader of the party. He will, if you have an environmental concern or any concern really, he's going to read all of your emails. But Tory Hawkins reached out. You will see a letter from her also in the February edition of the print Courier. It's online already, about her concerns over water quality in Blacks Harbour and what's been dragging on, we know, for years now. And it fits under what he's talking about is, don't we all have a right to a healthy environment? So he went to Blacks Harbour to visit Tory, to have lunch at the kitchen with Tory, to hear from Becky and the staff there too, and just to get an idea of what's going on. He took before he came in to sit down here, that's where he was.
We have discussed extensively the Liberals' policy of we're listening to New Brunswickers, and time again that sort of flips on its head because they're not listening to New Brunswickers in the way that I think New Brunswickers were expecting from the Holt government. But that is an example of an MLA who, by the way, does not represent this riding. Ian Lee represents Fundy the Isles, Lorneville, St. John. And so that is an example of an MLA who is, sort of reaching beyond party lines to listen to a New Brunswicker who is very concerned about the water quality in Blacks Harbour.
And I will say for people on the island, Campobello Island, we talked about the ferry too. Grand Manan, we also talked about the ferry. So check out the whole episode, please do. But again, talking to him about Blacks Harbour water quality under this bill that they're trying to get passed. It's up for third reading soon, so it'll be interesting to follow that in 2026. But Tory Hawkins was a good reason that he brought up for why these issues are important to him and his party.
Well, we'll see if he can get the support of the governing party.
Here is a part of my interview with New Brunswick Green Party leader David Kuhn discussing water quality in Blacks Harbour.
Well, I saw one of the filters in the restaurant that got pulled out, and it was not pleasant to look at. So there's a couple of issues there. One is the source of water, the draw on the water table, which is so huge because the bulk of it's going to supply water for the sardine factory, and the rest of it is coming to Beaver Harbour and Blacks Harbour. So the water table seems to be dropping. People in that area are losing their wells, have drilled new wells, and then they're running dry. So there's that problem, and then the piping into the community is old and problematic, and it's kind of a mishmash of older pipes and somewhat newer pipes, and none of that is, except for some of the distribution system, the chlorination plant, the water source itself is all run by Connors Brothers, or Bumblebee, I guess now, and so that's not right. There needs to be a separation between the industrial water supply and the municipal water supply, and people should be confident that their municipality is in charge of their water supply to ensure that their right to clean, safe water is enforced. So there's a bunch of things to be unpacked there. but there's a solution, and it needs in those kinds of cases a real partnership, a strong one between the provincial government and the local municipal government and its citizens to solve that problem. In some ways, this is a vestige of the way Blacks Harbour had been for so many years, where people lived in company-owned homes and paid the rent. I remember when those finally were made available and the residents could buy them. It didn't seem like that long ago. The grocery store was owned by Connors and all that. Well, one of the last things that's left over is they largely own the drinking water supply system, except for some of the pipes in the village itself. So that's got to be sorted out, and that requires a strong engagement from the provincial level with the municipal council. I'm hoping I can play a role to ensure that on the provincial side, they're doing what they should do.
That was part of my in-studio interview with Green Party leader David Kuhn.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, the New Brunswick Transgender Health Network asked the province to create a gender-affirming care clinic. Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. There are currently calls for better gender-affirming care clinics in New Brunswick.
That's right. The New Brunswick Transgender Health Network has sort of come out and said, we're a year and a half into the Liberal mandate. There were several promises that were made during the election for members of the queer community, including changing the billing process to allow more timely access to gender-affirming care in New Brunswick. And so naturally, they have asked for a gender-affirming clinic, a centralized one that would take away some of these barriers that we see, right? Doctors scattered across the province who are doing hormone prescribing and who, if for some reason they stop offering that service, then that patient has nowhere to go. And so that affects their mental health because they're being prevented from continuing their medical transition. So that's what they want from the Liberal government at the moment.
Okay, and when looking at data in terms of how easy it is to access care and of the like information, what do we find in terms of data that shows this is a real need and something that should be pushed to the front of priorities?
So there was a survey in 2020 done by TransPulse, and 64% of respondents, which would be two-spirit, transgender, and gender diverse people, reported having unmet healthcare needs, and another 40% of them had reported thoughts of suicide. So certainly there's a need here, but when someone does want to begin their medical transition, they could wait up to 5 years to be partnered with a practitioner that can provide them the appropriate gender-affirming care.
Tell us a little bit about who you spoke with and what new things you learned, if there is any movement right yet. Where does it stand?
Yeah, so there doesn't appear to be any movement. I did speak to Dr. Kathleen Taylor, who is a member of the network, who sort of said, if patients don't have access to a referring provider, then they're unable sometimes to get their foot in the door in terms of starting their medical transition. But she also pointed to, and the release pointed to other Atlantic provinces that have started this work and are I would say miles ahead of New Brunswick on this. Nova Scotia Health committed to expanding gender-affirming care last year by replicating a clinic that opened in the Annapolis Valley in 2024. Prince Edward Island is ranked among the best provinces in Canada for gender-affirming care, including coverage for non-surgical needs such as hair removal, medication. But advocates in Prince Edward Island are calling for some further gender-affirming aftercare support. So if an individual has gender affirming surgery or any surgical procedure, they would like to see greater support to that individual after they're in their aftercare and their recovery.
Okay, and have you heard from the Department of Health, Dr. Dornan? Has anyone said either way what's going on?
Some people who will know Dr. John Dornan, who was the former president and CEO of Horizon Health Network, is a doctor and an endocrinologist by trade. And endocrinologists are both doctors who deal with diabetes, but also hormone therapy. And so I did reach out to the Department of Health naturally, because this is a request that they want. And I want to just be clear. So they want a dedicated location for coordinated gender affirming hormone therapy, surgical navigation, and mental health support, in-person and virtual navigation services for patients and families around the province, a reliable point of contact for providers seeking consultation or clinical guidance, and partnerships with community organizations, Indigenous communities, and educational institutions, and system-wide training, and a virtual community of practice. And so I sent all of those to the department, and I sent a very specific list of questions. None of those were answered. I got a two-line statement response from Minister Dornan that said, we're aware of the request and the department is reviewing its budget.
Okay, well, it means that's a lot to read into, but hopefully it means there could be something on the horizon, but maybe not in the near future.
It's a bit of a nothing answer. They're looking at their budget all the time. And if they haven't figured it out by now, they're, I think that answer is going to fall short for the network and for the people who were promised movement on this particular issue.
Mm-hmm. Could it be and it would be a standalone clinic as well, one dedicated, and could there be something there also, I think psychologically, just knowing that you're in a place that feels safe and dedicated to your medical concerns?
The province already has a model that works, and Dr. Kathleen Taylor actually so candidly pointed out to me the collaborative care model is what they want. Right. They want a collaborative care clinic that is specific to Two-Spirit, transgender, and gender diverse people. That's what they want. And she said the government has shown a priority toward creating those clinics for cisgendered people, average New Brunswickers. She said she didn't want to discredit the fact that there are many New Brunswickers, thousands of them, without primary care. But this is something very specific, and the government has shown a propensity toward creating collaborative care clinics. They have the means to do so, and so there is an expectation that they would also provide it for this community as well.
Okay, and as we look at them roll out more collaborative care clinics this year, it could be a question that we bring to some of those announcements, I'm sure.
That's exactly right. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at what the team's doing next week. Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. Well, it's been quite a cold one lately in the community, so our lives have revolved around being here at the TV station and at council meetings, but I gotta say, other than that, I have mostly been around my bed and the heater and trying to stay warm.
Yeah, I tried to sort of like make the excuse for that first snow day, but it's like 700 meters from my front door to the station, so that excuse is not going to fly. But yeah, we have been here. We've been going to meetings. There have been actually quite a few that have happened in a short amount of time. And I'm going to be working on a few stories in St. Andrews, where my focus has largely been for a few weeks about the zoning bylaw, which is a change that is being made because the province mandated municipalities to change or redo their municipal plans and their zoning bylaws to take in the areas that were previously not incorporated and who now are part of the municipality of St. Andrews.
So St. Andrews Bayside, Shamcook, they've got to redo all of the bylaws to make sure it applies to every part of the count.
That's right.
Every part of what is now the town of St. Andrews.
That's right. And a lot of people have written to the Courier, have spoken to me, in town, saying that they're very concerned about the sort of the complicated nature of the document. It's hard to read. It's like 69 pages. And, they're worried about the word densification.
I was going to say, that's the word I've heard the most, densification. And we can unpack that again next week, because it is interesting. And when you live in the town too, you can't help but pay attention for your own personal reasons as well. But densification was what we heard most about at the meeting I was at. Though I was at the W.C. O'Neill Arena meeting, which tends to be your St. Andrews. To call it downtown still feels a bit weird, but you're more urban. You're urban St. Andrews in the town core. So densification was a big issue at that meeting. I'm still trying to see if I could put the whole meeting online so people at home can watch it, because it was interesting to listen to the questions.
Yeah, every community that is currently undergoing any sort of development is afraid of densification. It means it changes fundamentally the look, the feel, the character of where you live. You need only go to Fredericton right now and sort of see all of the changes that have happened in the last 5 to 10 years. So that's one story I'm working on. The St. Andrews Council has since released a statement in response to the Local Governance Commission's advisory about closed sessions, both for code of conduct and conflict of interest. I wrote about that quite extensively over the last several weeks.
And to great acclaim, I should say, we have heard from people across the province, not just readers, but other people in media as well, who just wanted to let you know what a great job you did looking that closely at, especially when we have an election coming up in May, giving people a greater understanding of what is allowed, what isn't. This actually helped change a lot of things in small communities, not just here, but around the province. And your work was a big factor in that.
Yeah, the release was born out of the fact that in that first story, behind closed doors, I requested a response from the town of St. Andrews about how many meetings they had held in closed session in relation to code of conduct and conflict of interest over the past 2 years, and sort of, I wanted to know whether, in compliance with the advisory, they would be revisiting those bylaws to change them to match sort of what the commission is expecting of them. And I did try to reach staff multiple times, and so this statement is coming as a result of that. So we're going to go back, we're going to, read the statement, take the statement, do a separate story, analyze, talk to people, and we'll go from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but to me, it's quite amazing to think that this could have gone on longer had it not been noticed. Not to say anyone is necessarily guilty of anything, but to me, it's just a sign of why journalists there needs to be more local media across. I could say across New Brunswick, but it's really around the world, across Canada. But it really shows you when someone's covering things, especially on a municipal level, how you can catch something that just because you're covering it in one community doesn't mean it can't have positive implications across the province as well.
Yeah, municipalities are sort of facing a challenge right now. 4 of them have been taken under supervision by the Department of Local Government, which sort of, takes that decision-making power away from the local community. And so this is not just happening in St. Andrews and St. Stephen and Eastern Charlotte. This was an interpretation that was being made by a large majority of municipalities in New Brunswick. So this, to some degree, came as a surprise.
Okay, well, keep up the good work. I will be heading hopefully to Graminan any day now. I'm speaking with all the people I need to speak with. This is all you need to know at home. I can't tell you what day because we're trying to arrange a day that works for everyone, but I'm coming to the island and I'll let you know on Facebook as soon as I know the date. So hopefully I can grab some pie. It's from Selena Leonard, and I am very much looking forward to getting over to the island. Thank you all for joining us this week. We look forward to seeing you again here next week on This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.